Oklahoma 34, Texas 30. Dare say I may have been at the two most incredible Red River Shootout games of all time, this one and 2 years ago. So I may be biased, but I am telling you, this is the greatest game in college football. This rivalry game tops any other rivalry game I've been at. And they tell you all the time in the South when you're growing up, Iron Bowl's first and foremost. And they tell you in the Midwest all the time growing up, Ohio State, Michigan is first and foremost. And I've been to both those games, and they are incredible. I am just here to let you know, if you've never been before, go. Just go. Just listen to the hype. And trust me when I tell you, it actually lives up to it. Unlike most things that get overhyped in this sport and sports in general, it is beyond incredible, off the charts, like goosebump inducing. Yesterday, 68 degrees at kickoff, rock solid dew point, loved it right there in the perfect range, and blue skies, no cloud within 500 square miles of the Cotton Bowl. And we had a game decided in the final minute. The Once Upon a Saturday tour, for the third consecutive weekend, has a game decided in the final minutes. Oklahoma's time was yesterday. It was time for Oklahoma to prove it, and they proved it. It's as simple as that. That's why we play the games on grass instead of on paper. You got Texas favored before kickoff. I picked Texas to win the game. Thought Texas would win. Wasn't very confident in it. That's why we didn't bet on it. But I had that familiar refrain in my ear. Had a lot of folks telling me Oklahoma hasn't played anybody. What you never take into account is the possibility that because that team hasn't played anyone, it just means the secret's been kept a little bit longer from public view. And then they play yesterday. And you know what a real team who just hasn't faced stiff competition yet does? They peak when they play stiff competition. Texas is a legitimate contender for the national championship. I think that today, just like I thought it going into yesterday. The difference is I now think Oklahoma is too. And they faced a legitimate team. Texas has already gone on the road and beat Bama. Oklahoma faces Texas, and what do? Over 200 on the ground. Dylan Gabriel, just a Warriors performance. They ran for a season high, 201, 10 tackles for loss. Defense takes the game over, 5 sacks. Defense probably could be crowned collective player of the game here. They were +3 in turnover margin. The intensity of Oklahoma was off the charts yesterday. The Cotton Bowl is just one tunnel in and out. Both teams share it. I was up there a good amount of pregame and postgame because I always love to stand there because, number one, you see like 47 celebrities, and number two, that's what my phone charger was, and number three, that's the only place I can get half-decent Wi-Fi signal, and number four, that's where catering is. So those are 4 really good reasons to hang out in the tunnel of the Cotton Bowl, but also the intensity. I'm not saying Texas didn't have it. The intensity Oklahoma rolled in there with, really incredible. That stuff doesn't happen by accident. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, but I mean, Brent Venables and that coaching staff, the support staff, the off-field folks there, nutrition, strength and conditioning, psychology, everything that goes into running a program, whether it be front-facing or behind the scenes, they had them revved up to the point where they were able to play at the highest level you've seen them all year, but play relatively mistake-free. Not a perfect game, but relatively mistake-free. They were far more mistake-free than Texas. They forced mistakes. But man, those players were wired. Pre-game, post-game, I probably had 20 Oklahoma players and coaches just come up to me. And none of them were like jerks about it or anything, but it was very clear they had heard what was said on the show. And in very friendly but firm terminology, they said, hey, you got to let folks know about Oklahoma. Oh, I don't have to let them know anything. I think you did the talking on the field yesterday, but if you didn't see the game, somehow go watch the condensed version on YouTube. Texas was 1 of 3 in the red zone. And I want you to just go back with me to Tuesday last week. That's when we do predictions on this show. And for all the talk about the quarterbacks, and there should have been a lot of talk about it, and I'll talk about it in a second. And for all the talk about the head coaches, and I'll talk about that in a second. We really pinpointed one stat category that we thought was going to decide the game, and it wasn't either of those, actually. Colin, let's roll it. You tell me what happens once teams get across the 50-yard line. Oklahoma has forced a bunch of field goals this year. So they've been pretty good at this defensively. Texas, at times, has struggled offensively when they've gotten past the 50. That was all you needed to know. Texas, 1 of 3 in the red zone for 3 points. Oklahoma 6 of 6 in the red zone, 34 points. That ended up deciding this game. Dillon Gabriel played outside his mind. I thought he was the most important player in the game coming in. We said as much last week. Dillon Gabriel, sure enough, was the most important player on the field. You know what I did not take into account? I watched what they had done with him so far this year. And Oklahoma, you can tell they've been kind of trying to manufacture a ground game. They haven't been great. They haven't been stellar running the ball. They haven't had a true breakout running back one emerge. And so they've been running him. Well, I think where I probably fell short in expectation of Oklahoma a little bit is I just figured that wouldn't continue against Texas. And not only did it continue, he added, 113 yards on the ground and a touchdown to go along with the 285 he threw it through the air with. Dillon Gabriel, if I had a Heisman vote, and they don't give me one because of the way I talk about the award sometimes, if I had a Heisman vote, if we're sitting here October 8th, Dillon Gabriel would be my leader. Dillon Gabriel would be number one for me on my Heisman odds list. Now, we got a long way to go, and that could fluctuate week to week. That dude stepped up. He did exactly what he's been doing all year. He listened to folks say, that'll stop once you face quality competition, and what he proceeded to do is play at his highest level against the highest level of competition. That's what great players do. Dillon Gabriel feels like he's been around for 13 years. He's getting it done for Oklahoma. He's the reason that they can compete for a national championship. The other thing that I want to remind you of is how important 4 quarters of football are and how important a year is. We had a stat we uncovered a little while ago. This is wild now. Last year, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. Last year, Oklahoma played Texas and Oklahoma State played Kansas State. And they lost. The Oklahoma schools lost by a combined score of 97-0. Those 2 games just happened again this week, and they won outright. Oklahoma State won outright Friday night, and we will touch on that later, kids. And Oklahoma, sure enough, won the Red River rivalry game. Now, they tell you, you can't make up 47 or 48 points in the span of a year. You have no clue how football works. If you say those sorts of things, you have no clue how this sport works. Yes, you can, because there's never really that big a gap between teams. That's just the kind of thing that can happen on a Saturday. That's not how wide the gap is between programs. That's not how wide the gap is between teams. Brent Venables needed this. Oklahoma needed this. They got it. It's the beautiful thing about Saturdays in the fall. People are allowed to talk about you in spring. They're allowed to write whatever they want in the previews and the magazines. They're allowed to talk Monday through Friday leading up to the game. It's all fine. As long as you get the chance to do work on Saturdays, as long as the game is played on Saturdays, all the other talking is both fine and irrelevant, and that includes the stuff said on this show, humbly. And they not only show up, they're the more... Look, I know you get a lot of splitting of hairs here. I thought they were the team that played at a higher level, if that makes any sense to you. I stopped short of saying someone was better coached than the other team. Who in the world's really qualified to diagnose that? Even I'm standing on the field. I'm not even watching on a TV screen. I don't know that. I don't know who's better coached. I'm telling you who looked more prepared and who felt more intense, and it was the team from Norman, Oklahoma. Now, that was my vantage point. You may have seen it different. But Brent Venables had this team ready, and that's not accidental. You can't have a team play at that level. You can't have a team execute at that level with a lot of the same pieces you had from last year's team by accident. You don't slip into that. You can talk about turnovers on the part of Texas all you want to. I'm standing there watching violence happen at the 2 or 3 yard line. I saw that collision. It happened 10 yards from me. That's not a Texas unforced error. That's Oklahoma making things happen. Hey, that's the Brent Venables defense that we heard so much about, wasn't it? What about Texas now? I got asked that a lot. I did postgame yesterday for CBS. I got asked that a lot. What about Texas now? Very simple. Very simple. I think no different of Texas now than I did 48 hours ago. Don't turn the ball over. Finish drives. They're an extremely good team. This is the luxury of the Alabama win. You see this schedule Colin showing you on the screen? You go to Alabama in week 2 and you win. You don't ever say this out loud, but you afford yourself a little insurance, a little wiggle room. You can lose to Oklahoma, in other words. Had Texas been already a one-loss team and they lose yesterday, what are we saying? We're saying the same things we're going to say about Texas A&M a little bit later on, because A&M dropped a game against Miami, therefore they didn't have any wiggle room. And all of a sudden, same thing we can say about LSU, already a two-loss team. I heard a lot of Texas folks, talked to some Texas folks after the game, and a lot of them said the same thing. We'll see them again, and I don't doubt it. I think we'll probably see a rematch of these two teams in the Big 12 championship game. I have no clue what will happen. I'm telling you right now, Texas would be favored again. They'd be favored again, and it won't matter then, just like it didn't matter yesterday, because you get to play the game on the field. The Texas State Fair was awesome yesterday. I promised that I was going to take you guys on a little bit of a ride in the Instagram story, and I did. And that'll be up in a reel later on, or a highlight if you want to look at it. Oh, we do have it. Roll it then. If you're watching on YouTube, halftime hits, field goal, I think, right as the clock expired. And so then, look, I go out there. I won a chicken head. I played flip a chick. Look at this game. It's amazing. You take a sledgehammer and you hit a catapult. And if you get that chicken in the bucket, well, number one, you get immense amounts of pride. The prize they give you is just a byproduct. And what a prize it was. I wore that thing for the better part of the afternoon. And then you top it off with funnel cake, and you've got the powdered sugar all over your mouth and your black shirt. And then what do? You walk right back in the stadium down the tunnel right as the third quarter starts. It's my favorite time of the year. Whenever I get to go to that game, I've done this twice now. It's my favorite time of the year. 20 minutes is the exact amount of time you need to get all that done. So Texas and Oklahoma, it would be a pleasure to see those two play again. Always a pleasure to go to that game. Unbelievable. I'm telling you, you doubt me, that's fine. I used to doubt the hype around that game. I've said this a number of times. I used to think they were just overhyping that game. And they weren't. There's no other setting like that in college football. The only other one that I kind of compared to it is Florida, Georgia. But that's just in an NFL stadium, which I've never been particularly fond of, which probably dampens my view of that game a little bit. You would think growing up in the state of Georgia, I would be biased that way. No, I actually think this game blows that one out of the water. Oklahoma, Texas is awesome. It's my favorite game to go to in college football.